Hi, welcome to Rev'd for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Justin Crisp.
I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And today we have Jesus and a select few of his disciples, the lucky bunch, go up a mountain and they're blown away by the glory of God. It is a paradigmatic mountaintop experience. Let's hear it. Reading from the Gospel according to Luke, the 9th chapter. Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord. What do you all make of it? Ever happened to you?
Regularly. Where are you? You want to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, here we are at the climax of our Epiphany season. And I think it's interesting, we every year ends. I don't know if people know this at home, that every Epiphany ends with the scene of the Transfiguration, year A, B, and C. So it's the crowning Epiphany story that we have. So it is an epiphany. It's a vision. It's like a revelation of who Jesus is. And Luke takes on its own character. But it's a wonderful thing. And I've thought about this in years past, that that our seasons of our church run in 2 similar cycles, where you get the preparation of the thing, the big centerpiece, and then a sending out, right? And so we have like Advent preparation, Christmas, incarnation, and then in the Epiphany, we're sent out, to kind of like recognize and say who Jesus is. And the Transfiguration is kind of this climactic sending where the disciples have seen the light, they know definitively who Jesus is, and so does Jesus himself. And they're sent down the mountain to go back and do the work in light of all this, right? And then we get Lent, this preparation for Easter. Obviously, Easter, the centerpiece, and then Pentecost and the Holy Spirit, the even more so kind of cycle of preparation, big event, revelation, and sending out. And I think it's kind of interesting that one happens in Jesus' lifetime, and the other one is the post-Jesus cycle. So it's more so like we have a brighter light, a greater definitive sense of who Jesus is. But I love this story because it's like they had their chance to get it while he was still alive and make something of it, and they still were like, because the next story in Luke is, where he's asked to perform a miracle that the disciples themselves couldn't do, cast out a demon of a son of a man, and Jesus is like, what more do you need? Okay, I'll do it. And he realized that the burden is all on him until the fullness of the Holy Spirit can come and fill everyone. But I've always found that a little bit intriguing to think of it that way. That's kind of this side of the grave cycle of the highest form of revelation. How could you get more clear? How could they possibly scratch their heads after this? And so you just wonder, like, what really happened? And it also puts a greater relief on, puts in starker relief what the Pentecost experience was, that it's actually, the moment of indwelling. You can't intellectualize. You can't just see and be told that Jesus is who he is. You have to actually experience it and be filled with the same Spirit. So I don't know. That's my first little framework thought that I've had about this story.
Well, this is, to my mind, one of the greatest stories of all time, period. And certainly one of the greatest passages in the New Testament. I'm gobsmacked by it. And I think it's got everything. It has Jesus' spiritual life. It has the disciples' spiritual life. It has Jesus' divinity unveiled. And I just have to make sure I don't talk too much. So I just, I really do. So let me just tell you what when I take a look at this. So in the beginning, it says Jesus took. So that we would say in our spiritual lives, I mean, what the alpha of every prayer, we would say, comes from God. This is what Augustine was fighting over, right? And so Jesus takes, and he takes his three guys, right? Peter, James, and John, his closest three. And they went up on a mountain. So in Luke's gospel, Jesus always goes up on a mountain to pray. He talks on the plain, and he goes up on the mountain to pray. Now he's taking his friends. This is Jesus' spiritual life. He's taking them and teaching them how to pray. They're, in some sense, going on retreat. Because what we have here is the model of contemplative prayer. That's what's unfolding. And Thomas Keating has helped to show that to me. But so in the beginning, we have Jesus taking his boys up there to go. And then we have, and while he was praying, so in Luke, it's always Jesus praying. Remember the baptism? He's stepping out of the water. While he was praying, these things happen. So always in prayer does Jesus' spiritual experience always happen in prayer in Luke's gospel. And then his face is changed. And that I'm just going to barely touch and keep moving because we get into the question of the face of God and all that means. And my favorite part was, and his clothes became dazzling white. I remember last time I preached on this, I spent so much time on this question of dazzling white clothing in the different translations. And remember that? And I went through, and in Mark's gospel, it has white as no, what's it?
Fuller or something?
As no fuller could make nice.
Fuller can bleach them.
As no fuller could bleach them. I mean, they're just...
It's like a Tide commercial.
Yes, it was like, from the 50s. Right. From the 50s, like a 50s Tide commercial.
They didn't have OxyClean.
Clearly not,
They can't find words for this whiteness because this is the light that's alive. This is divine light. See, our light is incandescent and is dead. This light is alive. And so it's sparkling with the divinity of God. And so they dazzling, and they got all these words, but it doesn't capture it. I'm going to leave Moses and Elijah as representatives of the Old Testament for you guys. And so then we get in glory, right? So what do we say when Jesus rises in glory? He rises into the light. It's the light. This is the being of God. That's what this light is. This light is a touch of the being of God. So they're seeing him in his being. This is his unveiledness. And they're speaking of his departure and also, his exodus is what that means. This is Jesus' exodus event, and we'll touch on that later, what he's going to accomplish in Jerusalem. And now we're back to the disciples' spiritual life. We're back to contemplation. And this is my second favorite line in the whole thing. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they were awake. Okay, so what is that? We've all been there. That's that contemplative place where you are both sound asleep. Your senses are asleep, but your spirit is awake. So you are both. In awakening, what do we talk about in the spiritual life? We talk about awakening, right? So these guys, their discursive brain has settled into their heart, and now their soul is arising. So they're asleep but awake, and then what do they have? Well, they have an epiphany. They saw his glory. What is epiphany? Just what you just described. They saw who Jesus was. There's the epiphany portion of this. And their guys are leaving. I'm going to leave off the booths. We should make a booth for Moses and Elijah. Hey, I thought Peter had it right. And we'll come back to that later. But Peter gets a lot of stuff wrong. This Peter gets a lot of stuff wrong. And so now we get a theophany. We get a theophany on an epiphany, right? And the manifestation of God, the cloud of unknowing drops upon there. They're overshadowed. Mary's overshadowed before she's found pregnant, right? And overshadowing the temple. God's coming into the temple. Jesus is the new temple. And so they enter the cloud. This is the cloud comes down on the top of Mount Sinai. And awe strikes in, they're terrified. Okay, so the being of God drops upon them, and so they just went from epiphany, now they're having a theophany. These guys are petrified, and they're like, holy smokes, we came up here to rest. And then comes the voice, and we talked about this in the last podcast. You brought up in the last podcast. What's the manifestation? What's the epiphany realization? Listen. Okay, right? So, and then we get right back to the baptism. This is my son. And then at the end, they're silent. They're just, holy awe has set in, and the only thing they can do is be silent. Because you can't talk after something like this, because everything is just fiddlesticks. You can't, there's nothing you can say of value after that. It's nothing. So unbelievable passage. Still radiating. You can see it radiating off my paper. Radiating.
It's a shame that we have to fill, because of the genre of a podcast, you have to fill the space here with more words.
It calls for some silence.
Right, I know it does. It calls for some silence when it's laid out in the way that you both just did. I think that this is one of my favorite passages, and I've spent a lot of time with it in different points in my life and at different stages of my theological development, my spiritual life. What always stands out to me is that when Moses is atop Mount Sinai receiving the law or communing with God, and so this is like around Exodus chapter 24.
Give us the verse
down.
Around what,
Around, yeah. I mean, he goes up a lot. Okay, he goes up and he comes down. He goes up and he comes down. Whenever he comes down, his face is shining.
Right.
And people are like, they got to put on their sunglasses so that they can look at Moses' face. It's as though the glory of God has stuck to his skin, like he's sunburnt with the glory of God. And Jesus also shines, but Jesus shines just standing there, right? Jesus is not entered into the cloud. Jesus shines before the cloud has showed up. Jesus is shining inside out, as it were, which is a revelation, I think, of the fullness of his divinity through the fullness of his humanity, and that's embedded here in the passage. I do think that there's a lot going on here about the relationship between Jesus and the Old Testament Hebrew Bible theophanies. Yeah. So theophanies is the word that you use, Peter, is related to an epiphany. It's a revelation, it's a manifestation of God. And in the Hebrew scriptures, there are very often meteorological theophanies. And I love this. I think that the writers of the Hebrew scriptures are using these meteorological language to talk about the sublimity, the awesome, terrifying, but also captivating and alluring character of being in the presence of God. And so the language that they develop for this is the language of like storms. It's the language of consuming fires. It's the language of pillars of cloud, etc. And so like the cloud descends upon Mount Sinai in circa Exodus 24, but the cloud actually first appears in Exodus chapter 13 when Moses is still leading. He's leading the people of Israel out of Egypt, and they're led by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so the cloud leads them by day, and then it turns into a pillar of fire which lights their way by night. And this is the cloud is the space within which God dwells. But there's also this feeling that at least I think there's this feeling even in the Hebrew scriptures, and certainly in their subsequent interpretation by Christians who are reading all this imagery as in terms of mystical theology, right. In terms of the tradition of Christian mysticism. There's a sense that the cloud, God's presence is within the cloud, but it's within the cloud, so it's as though you cannot see it. And there's a incredibly a very common depiction of God in the Hebrew scriptures that no one can look upon the face of God and live. This is why Moses asks God to hide him in the cleft of the rock so that he can see God's back, because he can't see God's face because otherwise he was drop dead. These people actually, Peter, James, and John, get to see God's face. Talking about the face thing, they get to see God's face. It's in Jesus, which is a different. Anyway, that's one way in which I think that there's stuff about the face going on. There's stuff about Moses and Elijah. Moses representing the law, the Torah, Elijah representing the prophets, the Nevi'im. And then you've got the appearance of the cloud again at the end. So you've got the dazzling whiteness, this appearance of glory, and then you've got the cloud. And I think that these are both theophanies actually, because they're both manifestations of God's glory. There's the first one, which is God's glory through Jesus himself, and then there's the glory of the Father, which descends upon the incarnate Son and says, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." And what you get is that this awesome, terrifying, sublime, ecstatic experience of being in the presence of God is what it's like to be in the presence of Jesus all the time. In fact, but the disciples only get it right here for a moment on the mountain. And that seems to be how my spiritual life is. So, like, right. That's how my spiritual life is. But that is who they're coming into contact when they come into contact with Jesus, the God of Mount Sinai. And it's mind-blowing, literally mind-blowing.
Nice. Yeah, that's nice. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
literally mind-blowing for them.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's written, in each of the synoptics, it's written there in the center, or, more or less in the middle, and then they go on with lots more story where they're still not, so to speak, living in light of this. Yeah. So yes, they have experienced that, but it's almost as if it was in the trance or their state of prayer that was so deep, too deep for words. They can't tell anyone about it or talk about it or don't or won't. I don't know, but they are not yet clear on what happened. And I think it's in the aftermath of the resurrection and everything where they can look back and say, wow, remember that time on the mountain? That must be what we were seeing. Or, it's...
Yeah, I think you're just right.
Who knows? I mean, and obviously Luke, all the Gospels are maybe they're taking this story from Mark, and Mark got it from the stories told in the aftermath. But, they clearly didn't tell anyone because, I don't know, it just feels like this is a story that could only be told in the aftermath of the resurrection. It's just too mysterious and too outside the normal course of their interactions with Jesus.
Oh, interesting. I never would have thought of that.
And it's while he was praying. All of this happens, as you said, Peter, while he's praying. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, to me, it's a very interesting it's like a Polaroid of something you can't quite, even in the grainy quality of what was really happening in that scene,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I still want to go back a little bit to, the difference between the Transfiguration and the resurrection. I think that Jesus, I don't know, maybe this story is offering us a glimpse of what might have been for Peter, James, and John if they had realize the importance of this and the reality of it in their own lifetimes. I mean, I just have to wonder what might have played out if, and it's true for all of us. Like, we can't live on the mountaintop. Like Peter, he wanted to stay there. And even with our epiphanies, we need to come back down to understand what they were. And I don't think you can ever know during the epiphany what is happening. Like epiphanies are almost always, I think, in the aftermath of realizing, the retrospective reflection on it. I mean, you can experience something and you're not making sense of it until way later when you can piece it together, look back on your life, see how you were thinking and now what that changed in you. So I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm fascinated by just the whole experience of a real aha moment, or this is much more than that. It's like an actual vision plus people from heaven and a voice from the clouds and all this imagery that ties to the Old Testament. And they still, we know they go down the mountain and don't fully understand. So I just think that that's something to comfort all of us, that we don't live our lives from epiphany to epiphany. I mean, we get some epiphanies, but you may never have an experience like this. But it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't who he is and you don't get to have that little movie play out for you, Yeah. So the resurrection to me is when it's our chance at transfiguration, where when you realize or whatever happens to you, your experiential moment of, oh, Jesus is changing me, even if it's gradual, it's in the metamorphosis of our lives that it happens. So I think that's kind of the image of Jesus' face change. They saw it, then they heard these voices. for us, it's the same. We kind of like see the face of Jesus change when we experience him alive and real in our lives, and then we are changed. But it's in this lifetime. It's not for when we die only.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I really wanted to
totally.
say is like it's something for our lifetime now, and they were offered this in their own lifetime, but that took a long time to get to my point. But you know what I mean? I just think we need to reclaim the resurrection for now in our life now, to be transfigured and transformed now, and not just leave it out there dangling as something that happens when we die.
I love that. And I love it partly because my suspicion has always been that what's being revealed here on the mountain has always been true of Jesus from the very beginning. The disciples just didn't see it until this point. Mm-hmm. There's something about the prayerful state, perhaps that Jesus' prayerful state combined with their prayerful state, that yields them this experience. But the same Jesus who is dazzling white here, who has the glory of God shining from within him in a way that blows their minds. That's the same Jesus after he's gone down the mountain and he's teaching and walking around and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They just see him on the mountain. Mm-hmm. And our lives are, my spiritual life, I think, is often about reminding myself that it's the same Jesus even when I'm not on the mountain, right? I don't know, Peter. One of the things that I've learned a great deal about the contemplative life from you. I know that you've thought a lot about it. And I know that you're a great lover of people like John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, people who are all about what happens when you come down the mountain. We don't always stay in the mountain. In fact, a great deal of the spiritual life, maybe even crucial segments of it, are experiences simply of the absence of God. It's like not only is Jesus not transfigured before us, Jesus is not shining at all. Do you see any of that kind of like the ups and the downs in this passage when you're reading it as a model of the contemplative life, or do you have to come down the mountain?
I don't want to ever come down from the mountain. I am Peter in the fullness of Peter's glory here.
Build the booth at the top of the mountain.
I'm all Peter here. So there's no doubt in my mind. Just a comment here. As scholars have looked at this, and there is a touch of resurrection stuff in this, and where this. I personally just take it as it is, and I have no issue with that at all. I'm all in with every word, and I wish there were more words. And one of the reasons I'm all in is Peter said, "Holy smokes, man, we gotta keep here, man. We're gonna build some booths, right?"
Yeah.
And Jesus says, "No." I love this. It's so almost bizarrely stated. He didn't know what he was saying. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's totally not true. He knew exactly what he was saying. That's a nice way of saying, well, he had a beer or something like that. He didn't know what he was saying. I disagree. I think he knew exactly what he was saying. It's biblical kindness to say he didn't know what he was saying. And then there's a great irony. I mean, I don't know if you, when you were there.
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, the great irony, if you've ever been to the Mount Tabor, where they have this, they have built a gigantic church with an unbelievable Jesus in the apse, which is shockingly stunning, the Jesus in glory. And then they have a little booth on the left for Moses and one on the right for Elijah, which you can't get into because there's 10,000 people on the mountaintop hoping to have this exact same experience. And the last time I was at this experience, or there, I was looking around for a place to make a little "You Are Here" video with my son Ben, and the place is a mob scene, and you can't do it because everybody wants to have this religious experience, and I'm fussing about like, Ben, we got to find a quiet place here, and I look over on the right, and there's a man who's been at a pilgrimage group that's been with us, and they were from Kenya, I believe, and he was on his knees, and he was dressed in the way that some of the Kenyan men wear clothes that are so awesome. They're just the amount of color in their clothing is dull Peter. I mean, these people, and he was on his knees and he had his hands up and he was looking at the sky, and I said, Ben, I should be doing that, not looking for a place to make a video. Here's a guy who wants to taste what happened here, rather than me making a video noting that these booths were built ironically in the aftermath. And I think that a sign that this is real is the very fact that Peter didn't want it to go. And the Pew Research poll has, at least last time I checked, 50% of Americans say they've had a mountaintop experience. Those mountaintop experiences are not necessarily epiphanies of the who-ness of Jesus. They're not necessarily theophanies of manifestations of God, but they are the sensibility that they were in heightened consciousness and they realized that it was all good. And they could see, in some sense, with kind of a different eye, to see with their whole being in a place of peace. And I believe that that's what happened to them, but they came down. Whether or not they could make sense out of it, hey, I must say that many of the spiritual experiences I had in my life, when they first popped out, I didn't tell anybody besides those who were the most close to me, because people think I was nuts. When I had my conversion experience, and I was not even a Christian, and I was fumbling around what to do with my life, and I said to my now wife, Jennifer, wait to hear what happened. I mean, I was worried about it. And she was like, you could never tell my parents. They'll think you're nuts. Never mind your parents, right? I mean, this is what I mean. These things of divinity make you seem like you are nuts. And they come down and they followed up. We touched on this a few months ago on my podcast. I have zero problem with the disciples screwing it up. I used to judge them. Now I'm like, oh man, I'm with you. I screw things up without ceasing.
Of course.
And I've had plenty of spiritual gifts not to do it, and I screw it up without ceasing.
I just want to put in a word for the epiphanies that are not so sexy. I mean, this one is set apart because it's absolutely like cinematographic. You could make a movie of it, right? They couldn't have filmed it because it wasn't that type of experience. But the details are so, graphic and tangible and literal. A cloud, a voice, the mountaintop, the figures appearing and the dazzling white, when in fact it's so much burning within, I mean, I'll take it at face value too, very happily. And it's a fantastic account. I also think that most people don't get this kind of epiphany. When we talk about epiphanies, this is not like the sole definition of an epiphany, right? Like epiphanies often are, you're passing by something, you glimpse something you've never seen before, and it's like you internalize that. And you can be changed in an instant walking down the street, or hearing a comment, or seeing an exchange between former enemies, or, like something can happen very quietly in the shadows, and you can be changed forever. Or you can read a book of a perspective that it blows your mind or offends you, but it cracks you open and changes you. And like, that's as much to me an epiphany. To me, the miracle here is less the face and the white and the figures and all that than what happens in the changed people. Like the epiphany, I think it's effective because people are changed by it.
Yeah, that's
even
beautiful.
Jesus himself.
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, I think that's beautiful, and I think that, I mean, you would agree, and you'll agree more, I think, in time, just because I'm older than you are, that the lived experience of God is a far more humble undertaking than any biblical story like this, and that the epiphanies of our lives are small things that have big changes. I mean, Teresa Lisieux used to say that she was a nobody. She did small things with great love. And it's almost as though that great love comes to us in a small thing. It's almost that her spirituality in reverse comes to us. So I hear that and I believe that. But if you take, there was a book I wanted to write in my 30s and I never got it out. And then I brought it in my 40s and I never got it out. And then in the 50s I quit. But anyway, and now in the 60s I'm talking about it. So what it was to say, what if we took all of these glorious spiritual experiences? You were naming them beautifully. I was giving you a hard time about what verse, but you were naming them beautifully. What if we took the mountaintop experiences from the Hebrew Scriptures and right through the New Testament, and you took these scriptures? These experiences are not just experiences for James and John and Peter.
That's really
these experiences are for you, they're for me, they're for us. This experience is a gift that's through time. We need this experience. We need to have these. We need God on Mount Sinai. We need this because we are still living off the spiritual experiences of these people. These are revelatory moments about God. There's a revelatory moment about the who-isness of Jesus. And we as followers of Jesus in the way of love. Our last podcast was, remember I punched you? Remember the last
That's
podcast,
right.
a bunch of
And
you
I
punch
said-
me
How
back.
you feeling,
Give me
Justin?
Right
the,
there.
right.
Turn the
So-
other cheek,
saying
baby.
He's turning the other cheek.
I'm so holy.
And you know why you can turn the other cheek? Because of this.
You're exactly
Without this, the turn the other cheek things, like, why would I do that? It's because we know the whoisness of Jesus. I say we need these monstrous things, but in our daily lives, you're absolutely right. We don't get this stuff. We're like, I got to go to the grocery store.
We're gonna have to wrap up here. That was an incredible conversation. I will see. We'll see what I preach about. I just want to end by saying that this kind of conversation is what I think Christianity is really all about. So during the season of Epiphany, we began with some talk about the wedding at Cana, the transformation of water into wine, and what would it be like if this was the hallmark story, right? If this was where our telling of the life of Jesus really began, with the story of water into wine, the party that never ends, the God of abundance, the God of celebration and joy and gladness, etc. And here we have the God of beauty. And I think that Christianity is the religion of glory, the religion of beauty. It's the religion of meeting a God who is so alluring that you're just head over heels for this something which is not a something, which is beyond being and non-being, which is somehow that without which there would be nothing, but you're captivated by this because you're captivated, and you're captivated for Christians because you see, as the proper preface in the Eucharistic prayer for Epiphany, we see the revelation of God, the knowledge of God's glory in the face of God's Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. That's the season of Epiphany here, and Epiphany is the season of beauty, the season of glory, and we are inheritors of the religion of glory, the religion of beauty. Even though you might not know it, depending on what you've heard about Christianity, depending on from whom you've heard it. In any case, we hope that all of you have a blessed rest of your Epiphany, whatever is left of it, whenever you listen to this podcast. And particularly, we welcome all those of you who are in our Maranatha house churches, and so are working on this here at St. Mark's. For all of you who are at St. Mark's or far away, God bless you. Take good care.